Welcome, everyone. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. We are excited to bring you yet another speaker who can talk to us about innovative ways of improving communities locally and globally around the world. The Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley is part of Rotary International, 1.2 million members and 36,000 clubs, people who are interested in finding ways to improve the world, which is a good thing to kind of be focused on, I would say. Today, we have with us a speaker from Germany. And our speaker is Kaspar Meyer. He is a strategic communication policy officer at the German Federal Foreign Office in Berlin. His work connects games and gaming culture with foreign policy. And we are really excited about how he sees the potential in gaming possibilities as we think about something that is perhaps thought of as more serious as foreign policy, but as we know in the E-Club, there are always ways to innovate and make a variety of things come together to serve the greater interest of service to others. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Kaspar. Kaspar, we are so pleased to have you with us. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Rushton, for the kind introduction. First of all, it's quite a privilege to speak to such a distinguished audience. For me, normally I present this topic, gaming, to other ministries within Germany. So I say this is a privilege and as well as a challenge because I barely speak to such a digitally minded audience. So please apologize beforehand if I explain something that is obvious to you. So I'll try to basically talk about two things. First of all, how we understand gaming, what gaming means to us as an institution. And in the second part, I will try to explain how we approached this connection between foreign policy and gaming, which can at first sight seem a little bit surprising. So first of all, maybe we can just throw around a few numbers. So we estimate that 2.5 billion to 3 billion people around the world game. They consider themselves gamers. We have mobile gaming, we have more serious gamers, and the gaming industry basically has a turnover which is bigger than movie and film combined. So already we can see there's a huge potential. In our job as a strategic communications officer, we try to explain German foreign policy to German public. We try to raise interest in foreign policy, and we also try to consult the opinions, the point of views of our audience. And we quite routinely deal with movies, literature, music. These are all tools that we use in our communication, and we also use to get an image or a picture of different countries. And we thought, well, why not use gaming? There must be a huge potential. There are different gaming cultures in countries. Games have an amazing potential to communicate complex ideas with immersive and visually stunning technology. So we thought, why not try to get a better picture and a better understanding of these games? So first of all, I think we can really look into the content of games. Some games deal with historic memory, or I think we could even say the politics of historical memory. Some games deal with history, they portray a certain way of politics, and even foreign policy. Some games really go as deep that they have diplomatic game mechanics. You can build little embassies, you can create public administrations, and many state and non-state actors are already using the content potential of games to basically place their messages. And many times these actors who are pretty much advanced in these areas, they do not necessarily share our democratic or liberal consensus. So already we can see that we are lagging a little bit behind there. I think what is even more interesting is sort of the social and cultural aspects around the games. So the gaming community has a certain way of thinking, of organizing social action. There are certain platforms such as Discord where you can collaborate online. You have Twitch where you can stream your games. You have influencers, and you have a huge passionate gaming community. And on the other hand, you also have some sort of modding culture. You create extensions, add-ons to games. Gaming fans fix bugs and errors in the games. So overall, a very interesting way of interacting. And Rushton, you mentioned that you try to improve communities locally and globally, and I think we should add to that digitally, right? You have in-game worlds and you have interactions around these games, and I think this is a some sort of challenge to us. I will come back to that point later when I talk about how we try to start this change at the Foreign Ministry. And lately there's been a lot of talk about the metaverse, right? Where the digital will become naturally part of our world. We will have little avatars and move around in digital worlds quite naturally. And I believe that the gaming world is probably driving some of these technologies, but they also have a lot of experience with the cultural and social sides of what it means to be represented by a small figure or to move around in a digital world. So some very interesting points that we could learn from the gaming community. So I would briefly mention a few products and formats that we managed to develop over the last 3 years, and I will try to put in some visual examples later on. First of all, we collaborated with a gaming studio here in Berlin to create a gaming-inspired educational app which uses virtual reality and augmented reality to project a map of the European continent into your living room. And then you can basically use your phone to explore 360 settings that tell us something about the history of Europe. And you listen to the stories of 5 Europeans, the intertwined biographies, the opportunities, but also the challenges that are created by the European Union on quite an individual biographical level. Another thing we have been doing, which I've always been very excited about, is we send our diplomats to go on Twitch to play computer games and to engage with the Twitch community. Just 2 brief examples. We try to pick games which we can connect with our work. We picked one called Moving Out. You have 2 small little avatars and you have to move out furniture under time pressure from a house. What's the connection with diplomacy? Well, it's something we do around every 3 years. So we kind of step into this game, but then also talk about much more serious issues. We did this one with our deputy ambassador from North Korea, who then answered questions. For example, is there a gaming culture in North Korea? What's life like in North Korea? What are our foreign policies priorities in this interesting country? We also picked a game where you basically move around robots called Portal 2 to talk about the international regulation of autonomous weapons which would act on the battlefield without any human being able to interfere in these decisions. So that's how we connect gaming and some of our issues. We also organized the global game jam. Some of you might know, or surely most of you know, the hackathon format. A game jam brings together gaming producers with experts from the field, and over one weekend they create small prototypes. Our topic was global sustainability, and we got around 12 charming little games. In one game, for example, you have to trade off short-term economic growth, which you need for political legitimacy, but also to finance energy transition. And on the other hand, the sea level rises. So this is a very interesting way where game mechanics and the restrictions can communicate that it's not just knowing what we have to do, but getting to the political decisions is actually the complex part. We have a few other upcoming projects which I'm very excited about, but I would now come to the second part. How did we actually kickstart this new approach within the Foreign Ministry? And I think gaming has an image problem. So the reaction you get normally is games, that's sort of a hobby for kids or teenagers. It has nothing to do with the serious world. So on the other hand, we also have the issue that the gaming community tends to view public institutions or politics quite negatively, because there's a history of misunderstandings, mutual misconceptions, I believe. So from the beginning, it was clear to us that we have to do a constant work of translation with both communities. So on the one hand, we started to identify gaming fans within the Foreign Ministry. We have around 14,000 employees around the world, managed to identify, I think, till now around 50 to 100 people. And this is a network of people that we can use in these formats. They can organically interact with games. And this authentic approach, I think, is very important. On the other hand, we try to explain to our colleagues which had less contact with gaming how it actually makes sense to use them to communicate both content of the games, but also communities around them. And this hasn't always been easy. So I remember in the beginning, we had the idea to talk about international law on Twitch with computer games, and we had a less than enthusiastic response. International law is a very serious topic. Games, are not serious by default. That was the perspective. So I think crucial was also that we connected with experts from the field. We had Manu here at the beginning. I believe he's a member of your Rotary Club as well. He created a study where he sketched out different approaches and different strategies how we could use the communication potential of games. And I think key to success was that we didn't focus just on one idea, but we really picked, I think, 3-4 different ideas, sent them like ships out on the open sea. And at different moments, some of the formats moved faster than other ones. But from a small success, we could then really make the case that there's a potential. And I think we reached a peak when our Minister of Foreign Affairs introduced this game on Europe at the Gamescom, which is one of the biggest gaming conventions in the world, I believe takes place in Germany. So there's sort of an effect that we could build on positive experiences when we could prove that Twitch is successful, that we get a positive feedback and we can really multiply our reach. It made us easy to convince people that a game jam might make sense. And right now we are at the point actually where we have a hard time of satisfying the demand within the ministry to create new gaming formats. I think relying on external expertise is crucial. We don't have the in-house units yet, the structural form to deal with gaming in an institutionalized way, and we constantly have to learn. So we created relationships with journalists that work on gaming, with influencers. You have gaming activists, with people like Manu who have this amazing capacity to understand both public institutions and the gaming communities. And we also try to learn from other institutions. There's a good deal of mistakes that have been done, I think, so far, and a typical, maybe dead end is to create serious games, at least from our experience. So the basic approach is, you know, we have this AAA game titles, millions of people play these games, we should create one that explains foreign policy. But generally they take a lot of financial resources, you have to monitor the content very closely, and the main challenge is how do you promote the thing at the end? So we decided that we would always go into existing communities, existing games, and existing contacts. Finally, I think we profit from this approach as an institution because we can raise the digital literacy of every diplomat who has to deal with gaming, just by terms of the technology that are used in the gaming community, but we also improve the gaming literacy. So first of all, that means take games serious, take the gaming community serious, but also understand that we can learn many things from the community. And this game jam really has been an eye-opener because you understand that gamers, they are civic minded, they have tools to help their communities, they can communicate within their frame, but also outside of their frame. And finally, we realized that now we have these sort of self-declared gaming fans within the foreign ministry. Those are people that work with a lot of passion on the topic and who really push these things forward with a lot of enthusiasm. And that's great that we can already rely on such a network. So these were some central points, and now I will hand over to you, Rushton, and hopefully answer some questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm excited about the questions that we'll have to ask you. I want to introduce the others who are on the recording. So Kaspar in Germany, also in Europe is our member, Cecilia Babkirk, who is on the east coast of Italy. We have friend of the E-Club, Heather Edwards of the Rotary Club of Eugene Metropolitan in Oregon. Good to have you. And my name is Rushton Hurley. I am the charter president and programs chair for the E-Club of Silicon Valley. So we'll start with a question about examples. If you think of a particular policy question that has been one that you've sought to bring gaming thinking to, so that people can perhaps address these more creatively than they have in the past, is there kind of a natural choice in terms of examples?
Well, we actually also developed board games, not necessarily a digital product, but we basically had a cooperation with the University of Wuppertal with the chair for design, and they created a matrix where you have different fields of policy and different game mechanics, and they tried to test out which game mechanics work best with a certain field of politics. And so, for example, if we look into political negotiations, We actually, you could go into game theory, but mostly you have to move a little bit your position to get to a collective result. So we created a game where basically you are rewarded within the game if you become better at anticipating the move of the people you play with. So this game is sort of built on political empathy, I would say, and it sort of echoes the culture that we have in Brussels, where you always have to find a conclusion or a political consensus among 27 countries. And I think the normal instinct is to focus on your interests, to basically explain why this is important to you. So political negotiations, I think, can very well be translated into game mechanics.
It's a great question from Cecilia in Italy. Thank you, Cecilia. I'll do a follow-up with that. When you think about having people begin to look at questions and to say, okay, this allows them to take the perspectives of others because that's necessary in a gaming environment to play the game well. Does that also go for having people who are participating in gaming related exploration of possibilities think more creatively than they would have otherwise? Do you find that as a part of the things that you do?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question indeed. So I believe that this sort of creativity to build around restrictions and limitations, that's really built into games, but also into building games, which is a different aspect of it, right? So I believe that for once there's great passion, but there's also great creativity within the game. So I think that I think psychologists even think that this sort of playfulness can be seen as one of the main traits of how to describe the psychology of a person. So if you foster this playfulness, I believe that we become more flexible in our head to find solution, for example, to seemingly intractable conflicts of interest that we can have in politics.
Perfect. Our next question is from Heather in Oregon. So, or I'm sorry, in Cofradía in Mexico. So Heather, go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Rushton. And thank you, Kaspar, for joining us. I appreciate you sharing all of this in a way that's accessible to maybe some of us non-experts. My question is about the culture of the industry and if you've seen progress. I know there's been a lot of effort to open doors for girls and women in coding and gaming. And I'm wondering from within if you've seen that progress and if you're actually seeing that play out in your world.
Very important question indeed. I think it really depends on how deep you go. So we found that within the ministry, surprisingly, as many women as men identified as gamers. We found that in our game jam, we had a pretty balanced field of participants. But overall, I think we can say that the gaming communities are probably still a bit more dominated by men. At the same time, we had interactions with gaming activists, there are transgender activists, so I get the impression that women within the community are quite politicized and they manage to raise their voice. The German Federal Agency for Political Education, for example, made a game jam on gender roles as well. So I think basically supporting those sort of perspectives is a very important thing. And I also believe that when you look into this potential gaming world, the metaverse, there's definitely a little bit work to do to draw more women into the field, definitely.
With regard to the varieties of people involved in these kinds of efforts, you mentioned the varieties in gaming culture, which I think is a very interesting insight as to what it means to try to draw lessons from the kinds of interactions and strategies that you see in a gaming environment. If you were to characterize some of the different varieties that have been most important in your work, how would you do so?
Well, I think, for example, in our game jam, the perspective on global sustainability can change pretty much if you have a participant from Bangladesh or Brazil or, say, Sweden, Germany, or the United States. So this is basically a little bit more about the political perspective on the most pressing challenges, but they are translated into what I would like to call a game that includes diverse perspectives. And for example, as a German player, I might understand that Bangladesh has different priorities, or Brazil has different priorities than Germany would have, and also is exposed to different risks. The other thing is also that these gaming worlds, if you look at Minecraft, for example, which is an amazing sort of digital space, it creates freedom basically to create your own world. So the potential is definitely there for a participatory, diverse approach. And I think that's something we should definitely foster more in this gaming world. The other thing is that if we look into gaming titles, we can also understand a great deal about, for example, how different countries think of their own story. There have been some amazing gaming titles from Poland which deal with the German-Polish history, and there might be different opinions on it, but if I understand that another country has this sort of perspective and I can experience it through a game, this might be more powerful than, for example, just reading about it or having a discussion. So some games, well, as a rule of thumb, games have to sell, right? They should be entertaining. But more and more games are taking on these sort of serious topics. And we believe that if you sort of just recontextualize this gaming experience, you can have a great conversation about foreign policy. This is not necessarily baked into the game, but the potential is definitely there.
As a follow-up to that, I think about the strategy nature of games. So one of the members of our club, Kaspar Meyer, is dedicated to helping young people learn to play chess, because that allows them not to simply react when facing an obstacle, but to think carefully about, you know, what is the next and the next and the next, to think several moves ahead, right? And that is a powerful educational tool for the children he works with. I also think of the students that I work with at a high school level in our Creative Solutions for the Global Good class. And I recently gave them a homework assignment to watch a video that included 100 different interpretations of a particular idea. Someone walking with a burden and with a large element in the upper right. And so what it generated was 100 different CG, computer generated artist work about this. A lot of it was kind of very dark and dystopian, but a crazy variety of it as well. And asked them to draw connections between projects they're doing in this. And so, you know, one of them actually said, this is the coolest homework I've ever had, which made me feel great. But when you think of gaming, both in the strategy terms and then in the digital terms, such as the artistically digital, so the computer generated art, this kind of thing, is it the case that represents a divergence between gaming thinking as well as people begin to approach the kinds of questions that you ask them to consider?
I think those are two very interesting points, right? The one is strategic, and I think also when it comes to changing our perspective on games, many times these games force you to think ahead. And it's not difficult to motivate a teenager to play a computer game, right? But I think we tend to underestimate. Maybe it's more the quantity that becomes a problem. But if I remember that some of the games I used to play, many times they really taught me to think ahead and also to combine many complex opportunities for acting, but also restrictions. So there's a great potential. The other thing that game philosophers like to talk about is basically this sort of theatrical aspect of gaming. And for example, you have these role-play games. And honestly, right now, I understand why teenagers like these role-play games, because you're in a stage of life where you experiment, you conceive your own identity. And I think this can also be functional, right? You can create your own little avatar. This is not a waste of time. I think it's a creative engagement with who you could be, and I think this is where we can also come back to the empathy, right? And I think also it can create a certain intelligence, a social intelligence, even how to interact with different cultures in online games, how to understand different, in these fantasy worlds, you have these different groups of people. So yeah, it maybe takes a little bit of creativity to understand the educational potential, but I definitely see it.
The one thing that strikes me about how we think about the group of people who would be involved in the kind of work you do. You mentioned that by some estimates there are 2.5 to 3 billion gamers in the world, and that represents between, say, let's call it a third of the population of the planet. Then you mentioned that there are 40,000 people working as part of the Foreign Office, and that you've identified 50 to 100 to work with you. I assume that doesn't represent the number of gamers in the Foreign Office. It's just the ones who have been a part of how they're going to work with you to explore these questions. Is that right?
Exactly right. Those are the ones that we identified, but it's sort of a snowball system. So step by step, we find more people who are in our embassies around the world. And once you've identified, you very quickly come up with new ideas of collaborating. So it's a very, very rewarding process.
Wonderful. Let's have our last question come from Heather in Cofradia. Heather?
Thank you. So one of the things that I love about speakers that Rushton finds is that people are passionate about what they do, and you clearly love what you do. So I'm wondering if you could possibly tell us one favorite thing. And maybe that's an impossible question, but what is your favorite thing about this line of work?
Difficult to come up with one thing. Maybe my favorite thing about us is maybe the depth and the immersion that you can create in these gaming worlds. And as we sit here in front of our computers, I just have to say that when you have a chat and at the same time you can move around in the world, you get this feeling of freedom, right? Your PC, your game becomes a window to the world and to other people. So I think it's definitely this sort of immersion, the emotions you get from interacting with people in these game worlds. I think that could be one point, yeah.
Wonderful, Kaspar. So we have about reached the tail end of our time. In a minute, I will hand it back to our speaker for a final word. Before I do, I'd like to remind all of you who are watching this as a recording that a little farther down our meeting page, there's a place to identify your attendance. And we love to be able to know who's joining us and from where, and please fill that out if you have time. And if you are a visiting Rotarian, having done so and putting in your email address properly means you'll get a generated email that you can pass along to your club secretary to make up the miss at your own meeting, if so. There is a forum at the bottom that you can also add your thoughts on this presentation and any other element of our meeting. You can reply to what other people have commented as well, and we encourage you to do so. As an online and asynchronous club, it is one of the ways that we connect with each other and share ideas. So please participate in that. A final thank you to Manu in Germany for creating the connection that brings Kaspar to us. It is always fun for our members to run across people that they think, wow, this would be a wonderful person to speak to the club. And we encourage all of our members to think along those lines as they run across wonderfully interesting people in their work and travels. As we always like to do, we hand it back to our speaker for a final word. So Kaspar, I hand it to you.
Thanks so much, Rushton. So I'm convinced that we have just scratched the surface as the Foreign Ministry of what sort of potential there is in gaming and the gaming community. So if you have an idea, if you want to exchange new suggestions, feel free to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I would be very glad to continue bilateral conversations on this amazing topic. Many thanks.
Wonderful. And for all of you who are watching, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week.